The moment Victor Thorne walked into his friend's dinner party, he knew something was different. It wasn't the elegant setting of Mark's newly renovated townhouse, nor the sophisticated jazz playing softly in the background. It was the inexplicable feeling that tonight would change everything, a premonition that made him straighten his already impeccable tie as he handed his host a bottle of vintage Bordeaux. "You're late," Mark Williams said with a grin, accepting the wine. For a CEO who prides himself on punctuality, that's quite the statement. Victor shrugged, his broad shoulders moving beneath his tailored navy suit. Board meeting ran long. Apparently, expanding a shipping company into 3 new continents requires more than a simple yes or no. The burdens of running Thorne Maritime, Mark teased, leading him through the stylish foyer into a living room where about a dozen guests mingled. "Someone here I want you to meet, by the way." Victor nodded absently, his attention already captured by the artwork on Mark's wall's new acquisitions since his last visit. As the CEO of one of the largest private shipping enterprises on the East Coast, Victor had developed an appreciation for fine things, and his friend's taste was impeccable. He accepted a glass of whiskey from a passing server and took a slow sip, letting the smoky flavor roll across his tongue. "Victor, there you are." Mark reappeared at his elbow, this time accompanied by a woman Victor had never seen before. "This is Gabriella Hayes. She works with me at the museum, our new curator for the modern maritime exhibit." The woman beside Mark was striking in a way that made Victor momentarily forget his usual polished greeting. Her dark hair fell in soft waves to her shoulders, and her eyes, an unusual shade of green, regarded him with a blend of curiosity and something like amusement. "Mr. Thorne," she said, extending her hand. "The shipping magnate himself. Mark mentions you often enough that I feel like I already know you." Victor took her hand, noting the firmness of her grip. "All terrible things, I'm sure." "Mostly terrible," she agreed with a smile that transformed her face. "Though he did mention you have an impressive collection of maritime paintings that would make our exhibit curator weep with joy." "Gaby's being modest," Mark interjected. "She is our exhibit curator and she's revolutionizing how we present maritime history to the public. You two should talk." "I need to check on dinner." He slipped away before Victor could protest. Left alone with Gabriella Hayes, Victor found himself uncharacteristically searching for words. In boardrooms, he commanded attention effortlessly. In social situations with beautiful, intelligent women. His track record was less impressive. "So," he began, "how does one become passionate about maritime history?" "My father was a naval architect," she replied, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of her wine glass. "I grew up surrounded by blueprints and models of ships. You could say the sea is in my blood, though I lack the technical mind to design vessels. Instead, I tell their stories." "And what story are you telling with this new exhibit? How shipping transformed modern commerce and connected the world?" Her eyes lit up as she spoke, her passion evident. "From container ships to," she stopped herself and laughed. "I'm boring you, aren't I? Mark warned me not to go full curator mode at social gatherings." "Not at all," Victor said truthfully. "It's refreshing to meet someone who cares about their work beyond the paycheck." Their conversation flowed easily after that. Victor found himself talking about his family's shipping business, how his grandfather had started with a single cargo vessel after World War II, and how his father had expanded into international waters. He rarely discussed the personal side of Thorne Maritime with strangers, but Gabriella listened with genuine interest, asking insightful questions that revealed her own knowledge of the industry. Dinner was announced, and Victor found himself seated across from Gabriella. The table setting was elaborate, the food exquisite, but he barely noticed, his attention fixed on the woman who spoke eloquently about art, history, and her travels for museum acquisitions. "You seem surprised," she noted at one point, catching his expression after she'd shared a story about negotiating with a notoriously difficult collector in Barcelona. "I am," he admitted. Most people I meet either want something from Thorne Maritime or are intimidated by it. You don't seem impressed by what I do. Should I be? Her eyebrow arched playfully. Is that why you attend dinner parties, to impress strangers with your corporate success? The question caught him off guard. No, but it usually comes up. I'm more interested in why you do what you do, not what it's gained you. She took a sip of wine, her eyes never leaving his. Though I admit, your shipping expertise could be very useful for my exhibit, perhaps I should be more impressed for purely selfish reasons. Victor laughed, the sound surprising even himself. How long had it been since he genuinely laughed at a dinner party? Now we get to the truth. You want my ships. Just their stories, she corrected with a warm smile, and maybe a loan of some of those paintings Mark mentioned. As the evening progressed, Victor found reasons to stay near Gabriella. They debated the merits of different artists' depictions of the sea, discovered a shared love for obscure historical documentaries, and compared notes on their favorite coastal cities around the world. By the time dessert was served, Victor had forgotten this was a social obligation, one of dozens he attended each month to maintain business relationships. Instead, it felt like the most engaging evening he'd had in years. When the party began to wind down, Victor felt an unexpected reluctance to leave. He watched as Gabriella thanked Mark for the evening, her graceful movements and genuine warmth toward their host only adding to her appeal. You're heading downtown, right? He found himself asking as she collected her coat. I could give you a ride. My driver is waiting. She hesitated, and for a moment Victor thought he'd overstepped. Then she nodded. That would be nice, thank you, though I should warn you I live in Brooklyn, not downtown. Brooklyn is no problem, he said, even though it was in the opposite direction from his Upper East Side penthouse. In the backseat of his sleek black car, the conversation continued, though a new tension had emerged, the awareness that their evening together was coming to an end. When they reached her building, a converted warehouse in a gentrified neighborhood near the river, Victor walked her to the door. I enjoyed meeting you tonight, he said, suddenly formal. Likewise, Mr. Thorne. Her smile held a hint of mischief. Victor, he corrected. And I was serious about those paintings. The museum should see them. Are you offering me a private viewing? The question hung between them, charged with possibility. I'm offering my collection to your exhibit, he clarified, though the thought of showing her his home, his personal space, was unexpectedly appealing. But yes, you should see them first. Gabriella reached into her purse and handed him a business card. Call my office. We'll set something up. Her fingers brushed his as she passed the card, the brief contact sending an unexpected current through him. Good night, Victor. He watched her disappear into the building before returning to his car, the embossed museum card between his fingers feeling somehow more significant than the numerous business cards he exchanged daily. 3 days later, Victor found himself unable to focus during a critical meeting about a potential acquisition in Singapore. His mind kept drifting to Gabriella Hayes and her maritime exhibit. He had called the museum the previous day, only to learn she was on a research trip and wouldn't return until the end of the week. The news had disappointed him more than it should have. Mr. Thorne. His assistant's voice broke through his thoughts. The Tokyo office is online too. They say it's urgent. Victor nodded, pushing thoughts of green eyes and intelligent conversation aside. He had an empire to run. Fascinating museum curators would have to wait, but Gabriella Hayes proved difficult to forget. That evening, as Victor reviewed quarterly projections in his home office, surrounded by the maritime art collection that had once been his father's pride, he found himself reaching for his phone. Mark, he said when his friend answered. That curator from your museum, Gabriella Hayes. Tell me about her. Mark's laugh carried through the line. I wondered how long it would take you to call. She made quite an impression, didn't she? She's interesting, Victor admitted, trying to sound casual and failing miserably. She's brilliant, actually. Turned down positions at the Met and the National Maritime Museum in London to build our exhibit from scratch. Has a PhD in art history with a focus on maritime trade, speaks 4 languages, and could probably run circles around both of us in a discussion about 19th century shipping routes. You're not helping, Victor muttered. Not trying to, Mark replied cheerfully. She's single, by the way. Recently ended a long-term relationship with some professor who couldn't handle that her career was taking off faster than his. Victor absorbed this information, trying to ignore the flutter of satisfaction it produced. I offered to loan some paintings for the exhibit. Of course you did, Mark's tone was knowing. Just paintings. What else would I offer? Victor asked, though the question felt disingenuous even to his own ears. I've known you since boarding school, Vic. You don't mix business with pleasure, and your art collection is very personal. If you're opening those doors, I suspect it's not just about supporting the museum. Victor sighed, leaning back in his leather chair. It was just one conversation. One conversation that has you calling me after hours for personal information about my employee. That's not like you. He was right, and they both knew it. Victor had built his reputation on being focused, disciplined, and distinctly separate from the playboy image that many of his fellow executives cultivated. At 35, he had dated occasionally, but always with careful boundaries between his personal and professional lives. Something about Gabriella Hayes made him want to blur those lines. When does she get back from her research trip? He asked instead of addressing Mark's implication. Friday, she's securing a collection of maps from a private collector in Maine. Mark paused. The museum is hosting a small reception for donors next Wednesday evening. She'll be presenting a preview of the exhibit concept. You should come. Will I receive an official invitation, or is this you playing matchmaker? Both, Mark admitted. But Thorne Maritime is exactly the kind of corporate sponsor we're looking for. It's a perfect professional excuse for you to see her again. Victor pretended to consider it, though they both knew he would attend. Email me the details. I'll check my schedule. When Wednesday arrived, Victor found himself spending an uncharacteristic amount of time selecting his attire. He finally settled on a charcoal suit that his tailor had assured him was his best cut, paired with a deep blue tie that allegedly brought out his eyes, information he had never particularly cared about until now. The museum's main hall had been transformed for the evening event. Display cases showcased maritime artifacts, while renderings of the planned exhibit space were mounted on easels throughout the room. Victor accepted a glass of champagne and scanned the crowd, telling himself he wasn't specifically looking for one person. Mr. Thorne. The voice came from behind him, and Victor turned to find Gabriella Hayes looking even more striking than he remembered. She wore a simple black dress that contrasted with her fair skin, her dark hair swept up to reveal an elegant neck adorned with a single pearl pendant. I didn't expect to see you here. Mark mentioned your presentation, he said, trying to maintain professional composure, and I'm considering a corporate sponsorship. How fortuitous. Her smile suggested she didn't entirely believe his purely business motivation. I was actually planning to contact you tomorrow about those paintings you mentioned. Were you? He took a sip of champagne, watching her over the rim of his glass, professional curiosity only, of course. Her eyes sparkled with mischief, though Mark speaks very highly of your collection. Mark talks too much, Victor said, though without any real annoyance. When would you like to see them, eager to show off your prized possessions? She teased, then seemed to catch herself. I'm sorry, that sounded more flirtatious than I intended. The candid admission surprised him. Did it? I hadn't noticed. Now you're lying, she said, but she was smiling. How about Saturday? The museum is closed to the public for maintenance, so I'm actually free for once. Saturday works, Victor agreed, trying to ignore the surge of anticipation he felt. I can send a car for you. I can manage the subway, Mr. Thorne. I've been navigating New York for years. Victor, he reminded her, and it's not about capability, it's about convenience. She seemed about to argue, then nodded. All right, Victor, send your car, but I'm still taking the subway home. We'll see, he said. earning himself another of those smiles that seemed to light up her entire face. They were interrupted by the museum director calling for attention, and Gabriella excused herself to prepare for her presentation. Victor found a spot near the back of the gathering, watching as she transformed from the playfully challenging woman he'd been bantering with into a poised, authoritative expert. Her presentation was compelling a vision for an exhibit that would trace the evolution of maritime trade and its impact on global culture through art, artifacts, and interactive displays. "The sea has always connected us, even as it divides us," she concluded, her passion evident in every word. "This exhibit will show how the human drive to cross those waters has shaped our modern world. With your support, we can tell that story in a way that honors the past while inspiring future generations." The applause was enthusiastic, and Victor found himself nodding in agreement. She had articulated the very philosophy that had guided Thorne Maritime for 3 generations, the belief that shipping wasn't just about moving goods, but about connecting humanity. As the crowd dispersed into networking clusters, he made his way toward her. "That was impressive," he said when he finally reached her side. "You've clearly given this a lot of thought. 3 years of planning," she admitted. "This exhibit is essentially my academic thesis come to life." "Well, consider Thorne Maritime officially interested in sponsoring it." The decision was impulsive by his standards, but he meant it. "My legal team can draw up the paperwork next week." Her eyes widened slightly. "Just like that. Don't you need to discuss it with your board or financial advisors?" "One of the advantages of running a privately held company," he explained. "Some decisions I can make without committee approval." "I see." She studied him for a moment. "And is this decision based on the merit of the exhibit, or—" Victor met her gaze steadily. "The exhibit deserves support regardless of who's curating it. The fact that I find the curator intriguing is a separate matter entirely." The directness of his statement seemed to catch her off guard. A faint blush colored her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "Most men in your position would be more subtle. I've found that subtlety often leads to misunderstanding. I prefer clarity." He set his empty glass on a passing server's tray. "I find you interesting, Gabriella, professionally and personally. If that makes you uncomfortable, I'll focus solely on the museum partnership." She considered this, then shook her head slightly. "It doesn't make me uncomfortable, surprised perhaps, but not uncomfortable." A small smile played at her lips. "Saturday at 1 o'clock would work for viewing your collection, for the exhibit's sake." "For the exhibit," he agreed, though they both recognized the pretense for what it was. "I'll send the car at 12:30. Saturday arrived with uncharacteristic anticipation for Victor. He had instructed his housekeeper to prepare a light lunch, ensured his art collection was properly lit, and even spent time selecting background music details he rarely bothered with for guests. He told himself it was because Gabriella would be evaluating his paintings for museum display, but the truth was more fundamental. He wanted to impress her. At precisely 1 o'clock, his elevator announced an arrival. Victor straightened his casual sweater, another departure from his usual weekend attire of suits or business casual, and walked to the private foyer. The doors opened to reveal Gabriella, looking refreshingly different in slim jeans and a soft blue blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Your building has more security than some museums I've visited," she remarked, stepping into the penthouse. "I had to show ID twice before they would let me up." "Occupational hazard," he explained. "Shipping executives sometimes make powerful enemies in certain parts of the world." She nodded, her attention already drawn to the spacious living area with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. "This view must never get old." "It doesn't," he agreed, watching her take in the space. "Would you like a tour before lunch, please?" Her eyes had found one of his paintings, a small but exquisite rendering of a merchant ship battling a storm off the coast of Cornwall. "Is that an original Bartholomew?" "Good eye," he said, impressed. "My grandfather acquired it in the 50s. It was the first significant piece in our family collection." It's extraordinary. She moved closer to examine it. The museum has been trying to secure a Bartholomew for the exhibit, but they're rarely available for loan. This one could be, Victor offered, standing beside her. Along with anything else here that would enhance your exhibition. She turned to look at him, their proximity suddenly apparent. Why are you being so generous, and don't say it's for the tax write-off? It's not, he admitted. I grew up surrounded by these paintings. They tell a story that shaped my family and, by extension, me. Your exhibit seems like an opportunity to share that story more widely. She studied him, as if trying to determine his sincerity. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. Thank you, that means a lot. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Then Victor gestured toward the hallway. The main collection is displayed throughout the apartment, but the maritime pieces are primarily in the library. The tour continued through rooms filled with carefully curated art, not just maritime pieces, but works that reflected a cultivated appreciation for beauty in various forms. Gabriella moved through the space with the practiced eye of a curator, occasionally stopping to examine a particular painting more closely or ask about its provenance. In the library, with its walls of leather-bound books and nautical maps, she seemed most at home, exclaiming over rare pieces and engaging Victor in discussions about artistic techniques and historical contexts. Her knowledge was impressive, her enthusiasm infectious. Victor found himself telling her stories about growing up with these paintings, memories he rarely shared with anyone. My father used to sit me in front of this one, he said, indicating a large canvas depicting a fleet of clipper ships racing across the Pacific. He'd tell me about the tea races, how captains would risk everything to be the first to reach London with the season's cargo. He saw it as the perfect metaphor for business calculated risk leading to extraordinary reward. Is that how you see it? She asked, her gaze thoughtful. Victor considered the question. I used to, now I see more nuance. These ships carried people too, not just cargo. Lives were shaped by these journeys, connections formed across vast distances. He smiled slightly. Perhaps I'm becoming sentimental in my old age. 35 is hardly old, she countered, having clearly done her research. And acknowledging the human element of commerce isn't sentimentality, it's wisdom. The tour concluded in the dining room, where lunch awaited them, a selection of Mediterranean dishes arranged on the table. I wasn't sure what you preferred, Victor explained as they sat, so I asked for a variety. It all looks wonderful, she assured him, accepting the glass of white wine he offered. Though I should warn you, curators develop hearty appetites from walking museum floors all day. I'll keep that in mind for future meals, he said, the implication that there would be more such occasions hanging between them. Over lunch, their conversation shifted from art to more personal territories. Victor learned that Gabriella had grown up in Boston, the only child of academics who had encouraged her passion for history from an early age. She had traveled extensively for her research, spoke French and Italian fluently, and had once considered becoming a marine archaeologist before art history captured her interest. In turn, he found himself sharing details of his own life that few outside his immediate circle knew: his parents' contentious divorce when he was 12, his strained relationship with his younger brother, who had rejected the family business to become a photographer in Iceland, his own brief rebellion at 20, when he'd considered walking away from Thorne Maritime to pursue law. What changed your mind? She asked, genuinely curious. Reality, he admitted. I realized I was running from the company because it was what everyone expected of me, not because I didn't want it. Once I acknowledged that I actually loved the business, the decision was easy. And now you're one of the youngest CEOs of a global shipping enterprise. She tilted her head slightly. Do you ever wonder about the road not taken? Sometimes, he conceded. But I suspect I would have found my way back to shipping eventually. It's in my blood, as you might say. The afternoon extended into early evening as they continued talking, moving from the dining room back to the library, where Victor showed her rare navigation charts his grandfather had collected. The professional pretense of the visit had long since faded, replaced by a mutual recognition that something significant was developing between them. "I should probably go," Gabriella said finally, glancing at her watch. "I've taken up your entire Saturday." "I've enjoyed every minute," Victor told her, not bothering to hide his reluctance to see her leave. "And I've made a list of the pieces you were interested in for the exhibit. My assistant will coordinate with the museum for transportation and insurance." "That's incredibly generous." She hesitated, then added, "Though I have to admit, I'm now concerned about the appearance of impropriety. If we're, whatever this is becoming, while you're sponsoring my exhibit." "A valid concern," he acknowledged. "Professional ethics matter to both of us." "But I made the decision to sponsor the exhibit before today, based on its merits. The paperwork is already being processed," she nodded slowly. "Still, people will talk, people always talk." He moved closer to her. "The question is whether we let that possibility stop us from exploring this connection." Gabriella looked up at him, her expression open and direct. "I don't want it to. Stop us, I mean." The admission hung between them for a heartbeat before Victor closed the remaining distance and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When she responded, wrapping her arms around his neck and deepening the kiss, the answer was clear. They fit together perfectly, as if they had been moving toward this moment since that first meeting at Mark's dinner party. When they finally parted, Victor kept his arms around her waist. "Have dinner with me tomorrow night, a proper date, not a professional meeting disguised as one." Her smile was radiant. "I'd like that very much." The weeks that followed were a revelation for Victor. He found himself rearranging meetings to make time for evening walks through the museum after hours, when Gabriella would show him the progress on her exhibit. He joined her for research trips to maritime archives, discovering a renewed appreciation for his industry's history through her passionate perspective. She, in turn, became a regular presence in his apartment, often spending evenings curled beside him on the sofa, discussing art and business and everything in between. Their relationship developed with surprising ease, each discovering facets of the other that seemed to complement their own strengths and weaknesses. Victor's pragmatic business mind balanced Gabriella's creative vision. Her warmth and openness softened his tendency toward reserved caution. They challenged each other intellectually, while providing emotional support that neither had realized they were missing. 6 months after Mark's dinner party, as the maritime exhibit prepared for its gala opening, Victor stood in his bedroom considering a small velvet box. The diamond ring inside represented a decision he had never expected to make so quickly or so confidently. Yet as he thought of Gabriella, currently overseeing the final installation of artifacts at the museum, he knew with absolute certainty that she was the woman he wanted to share his life with. The exhibition opening was a triumph. Critics praised its innovative approach to maritime history. Donors expressed enthusiasm for its educational potential. And even Victor's board members, initially skeptical of his personal involvement with the project, acknowledged its value to the company's legacy and public image. At the center of it all was Gabriella, radiant in a deep green gown that matched her eyes, expertly guiding guests through the displays she had curated with such care. Victor watched her from across the room, his chest tight with pride and something deeper, a certainty that had been building since that first conversation at Mark's dinner party. "You're staring," Mark commented, appearing at Victor's side with 2 champagne flutes. "Though I can't blame you." "She's remarkable, she is," Victor agreed, accepting the champagne. "I never thanked you properly for introducing us." "No thanks needed. Watching you two together is thanks enough." Mark clinked his glass against Victor's. "I've never seen you like this, Vic. It suits you." As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Victor found Gabriella in the central gallery, standing before the painting from his grandfather's collection, the Bartholomew Seascape, that had first caught her eye in his apartment. "It looks perfect here," he said, coming to stand beside her. "It does," she agreed, leaning against him slightly. "Though I'll miss seeing it in your library." "You could see it every day," he suggested casually, "if you lived there." She turned to face him, her expression questioning. "Victor." Instead of answering immediately, he reached into his pocket and withdrew the velvet box. Gabriella's eyes widened as he opened it to reveal the ring inside a vintage sapphire surrounded by diamonds, reminiscent of the sea she loved so much. "6 months ago, I walked into a dinner party and met a woman who changed everything," he said quietly. "I never expected to find someone who could understand both my passion for my work and my need for something beyond it. You've become essential to me, Gabriella. I love you and I want to build a life with you." Tears shimmered in her eyes as he dropped to one knee, still holding the open box. "Gabriella Hayes, will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Victor, yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, surrounded by the maritime exhibit that had brought them together, Victor thought of the journey that had led to this moment. From a chance meeting at his friend's dinner party to this profound certainty that he had found his partner in all things. It was a voyage he had never anticipated, but now couldn't imagine his life without. 1 year later, they exchanged vows aboard a restored 19th-century sailing ship anchored in New York Harbor, with Mark serving as best man and the Maritime Museum staff in attendance. The Bartholomew painting, a wedding gift from the museum trustees, hung in the nursery they were preparing for their first child, a daughter who would be born with the sea in her blood and stories of ships in her heritage. And on quiet evenings, when work was done, and they sat together watching the lights of the harbor from their terrace, Victor would often remind Gabriella that the greatest voyage of discovery in his life had begun with a simple dinner party invitation, one he had nearly declined in favor of another late night at the office. "Imagine if you hadn't gone," she would say, nestled against him. "I can't," he would reply, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Some ships are destined to find their way home, no matter what storms lie between them and the harbor."